Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
That's the power of love. That's the power of love.
Well, it's the power of something this morning on this early day into the new year. Good morning and welcome back. It's The Law Show here on CIL 650, talking about power of attorney and wills and the New Year's legal checkup with John Lakes and John White, partners at LakesWhyteLLP, a North Vancouver law firm, looking at estate planning, estate litigation, and you, John White, are the litigator. You spent a lot of time in court. Does power of attorney present legal problems, or is it intended to do the opposite, to eliminate legal problems?
It's intended to eliminate legal problems, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't create legal problems of its own.
How so?
Well, powers of attorney get abused. Attorneys are people who are given an awful lot of power under many powers of attorney. As I said earlier, I mean, some of or many of these powers of attorney give the attorney the ability to do almost anything that the donor can do legally.
Right.
And so an attorney has some duties to the donor as a result. And they've got
legally described duties, too,
legally
right?
described duties. They've got a duty to act honestly and in good faith. They've got a duty to exercise care and diligence and skill of a reasonably prudent person.
Okay.
They've got to act within the authority given them in the power of attorney itself, and they've got to keep records as to what they've done in case it becomes necessary to examine their conduct later. And all of these are prescribed by our Power of Attorney Act as things that an attorney must do.
Okay.
So you can't go hog wild as a power of attorney and do whatever you want. You have to act within the best interests of the donor at all times.
I'm curious, do you at Lakes White, do you get calls just out of the blue from people who well, you know, I just had this most interesting conversation. Someone asked me to be their representative in a power of attorney arrangement. If I agree and if I sign on, what am I responsible for? Do people call you up going, help? I don't know. I've never been asked this before.
Yes. And I mean, there's a category of clients that I call the Eleanor Rigby's. And that's the problem. There's people out there, and as families get smaller, when you get into 2 children per family, there are people who, because normally you would ask relatives to look after these things.
Sure.
But there's people who either don't have any relatives, or else, you know, their closest relative, their sister who lives in Sydney, Nova Scotia, they don't have people here.
Right.
So they're asking somebody to be in charge of their affairs. And the people are saying, well, that's a good friend of mine. I don't mind doing that, but I don't know that much about somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to think of what people in China are now facing, because you're now getting into a second generation of only children. So not only do these people not have brothers and sisters, they don't have aunts, they don't have uncles, and they don't have cousins.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if anything, there's going to be more and more people asking friends to become powers of attorney rather than the normal relatives.
And so now we're learning that if someone, and it's the New Year's, and it's people are starting to organize their affairs beginning a new year. Some of them hopefully will take some incentive from our conversation this morning and do that legal checkup, John White, that you suggested everyone do. It's a healthy exercise once a year. Where am I legally? Have I got all my affairs in order? Is the paperwork up to date? Not a hard thing to do. John Lakes, is it possible to have more than one power of attorney at a time, or is it a one-only deal?
Well, you can have more than one. So, for example, Sterling, you may have a power of attorney to your wife. All right.
Okay.
So, and then maybe you and your wife decide to take this 6-month dream trip around the world. Well, you may want to leave a power of attorney for your daughter in case your visa gets stolen, or your credit card gets stolen, or a tree falls on your roof, or so you may do another power of attorney, but you say, because normally in a power of attorney, the power of attorney document says I revoke all previous wills. In the power of attorney, you would say is, I'm giving my daughter a power of attorney, However, my power of attorney to my wife still remains in effect. So
Okay.
technically, you could have two competing powers of attorney.
Okay.
And you could get around that by saying, well, this power of attorney expires September 1st, 2016 or something like that.
But you also mentioned to me during the break, and I hadn't even thought about this. Most of us who deal with financial advisors in one form or another, that person we've empowered to buy and sell ETFs or mutual funds or stocks and manage our portfolios. We're not stockbrokers, for crying out loud. So you have the meeting, you discuss your annual strategy, and that person has your permission to manage your account, to buy this and sell that, get rid of the stuff that isn't making money and acquire stuff that might. That's a power of attorney arrangement, isn't it?
That is, and most financial institutions like their own powers of attorney too. So if you, for example, have power of attorney with your sister of her bank account, you may have signed a power of attorney at the bank, but that is only for that bank account.
That one item.
And it's not for general purposes.
Okay.
Too. So it's important you don't want those things revoked either, because you want your financial advisor to renew your GIC, because if all of a sudden you get 6% or something.
Sure.
So it's an important document, because you are actually granting your legal rights to a third party to administer.
Right. And you, John White, described some of the legal obligations that fall upon a person who accepts the appointment of being the attorney. And of course, power of attorney throws a lot of us off, because you don't have to be a lawyer to be the attorney who receives the power of attorney, do you?
No, you don't. I mean, you have to be an adult, and I guess you've got to be a competent adult, but you sure don't have to be a lawyer.
Right. And where do things go off, if at all? Where do things go off the rails? You're of this duo. You're the guy who goes to court the most and sorts some of this stuff out. Where does it get messy, John?
Well, I mean, look at those duties that an attorney is required by our legislation to uphold. They've got to act honestly and in good faith. That's the first one.
Right.
So there are people out there who act dishonestly and in bad faith in the exercise of powers of attorney. Such as transferring assets from the donor to, perhaps not to themselves, but to another family member, or to some other person or even corporation that they control. That is, to my mind, an obvious misuse of a power of attorney. It's an abuse of a power of attorney.
Right, of course. It's fraud, isn't it, for crying out loud?
Other people act not dishonestly, but negligently. Let's say they make decisions under their power of attorney that causes a huge loss to the donor. There are protections under the Act for people who make honest mistakes, as long as they're acting at least as a reasonably prudent person. You don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be reasonably prudent. You can't take unnecessary risks with somebody else's assets.
Of course.
Some people act outside of the limited authority of a power of attorney. They do things that they are not allowed to do under the power of attorney.
Get a little carried away with the...
They do. They get a little too excited
right.
by this newfound sense of power that they're given. Some people can get into trouble by acting properly, but not keeping records to show what they've done.
And that's part of the law, isn't it? If you're representing a person as their power of attorney, you must keep records.
You have a positive obligation to keep records.
Right.
And that's so that if your conduct ever comes into question, you have all of the records there which a court can look at to determine whether you've acted appropriately or not.
Right. So, John Lakes, as we take a look at this power of attorney business, and many of us, for example, for the first time, are contemplating, well, if I need somebody to stand in for me, perhaps if I'm out of the country, or perhaps if I become incapacitated, I'm going to have to... I got to figure out who that person's going to be. Can you give us any tips based on your many years of experience as a good character type to be selected for power of attorney appointments?
Well, watch out for brand new best friends.
All right, that's great.
You know the old saying, "Smiley people tell lies."
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, usually the family member is the best person to choose.
Okay.
You can appoint the public guardian trustee, but again, they're not going to encourage it. The last resort. You can appoint a financial institution as well too. But,
oh, okay.
But and you may appoint a friend or a business person. I mean, you also may have powers of attorney for certain purposes. So John and I have power of attorney for each other.
Okay.
For business purposes. John can't sell my house,
Mm-hmm.
but if something happens in our business, he can deal with it.
And is that typical in any enterprise, John Lakes? Is it do partners typically support each other with that kind of power of attorney partner arrangement?
They should, but doesn't necessarily they're going to.
Okay.
I mean, classic example, for example, is you're getting more and more people now with shared houses. With the real estate prices in Vancouver,
Yeah.
you're getting people to have, each has a half the house. And quite often they have a co-ownership agreement as well, too. But let's say you're sharing that house with your daughter, and your daughter's paying half the mortgage,
Mm-hmm.
and she has a car accident, you've got a power of attorney for her. There may be resistance from the bank to allow you to use her funds to pay half the mortgage because it's in your best interest the mortgage is paid as well. So
Sure.
you may have to have a special provision in the power of attorney to say, and I specifically allow my dad Sterling to pay
Sure.
half, or sometimes what happens when you've got a husband and wife who've been married for a long, long time, and they have all their assets jointly, and then they turn around to sell the big house, and they want to buy a condo, and the man's in a care home. Sometimes there's a resistance to allow the wife to continue to have the funds in joint, and instead they say, oh, you should split the monies. But if the power of attorney allows that to happen, then she can do that. So the wording of the power of attorney for special circumstances are really important.
Exactly. And John White, back to this very brief discussion about small business people. As you two are small business people, you have a partnership, you have an enterprise, you have staff and all the rest of it. So to any small business person listening on this early juncture in a brand new year that doesn't have a power of attorney agreement or arrangement with their business enterprise partners, would you recommend that as a really smart thing to investigate as early as possible?
I would certainly recommend investigating it. I can't comment as to whether it's appropriate for everybody.
Of course.
But it would be a good subject of conversation as part of your legal checkup with your legal advisor.
Right.
I mean, talk about it. Why not?
Right. And in many cases, a business would have been organized by a legal advisor, all the partnership agreements and so on, drawn up by a lawyer. So presumably a power of attorney might be included in that. But I take your recommendation, John White. For any small business person, as we do this annual legal checkup, how healthy is that power of attorney? What do you mean we don't have a power of attorney agreement? That kind of revelation would be good to happen, so at least you know where you stand. Again, this is all part of organizing a new year.
The part of the problem, too, is a lot of people may have powers of attorney, but they can't find them.
Aha.
And
that's the case with a will, too, isn't it?
That's the problem. I mean, you can register a power of attorney in the land titles office.
Okay.
So it's there, but, I mean, there's no point having something if you can't find it. Now, the other thing, Sterling, is you're talking about people having all these legal agreements. Well, the one good thing about the internet now is it used to be half these agreements were written on a scrap of paper.
Sure.
Now there's usually at least an email setting out the business arrangements. But a lot of businesses, they've never really done much as to, they all figure everybody's going to live forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's something they need to look at, and they also have to realize that the power of attorney is, as soon as the person who gives the power of attorney has died, the power of attorney is finished. It doesn't survive death either. So it's only one part of a thing to do. But the appointment of somebody whose power of attorney is really, really important.
Exactly, and that's why I was hoping you were going to be able to help us out with just, I guess, maybe just people should not, this should not be taken frivolously. If you're going to ask someone to enter into a power of attorney agreement, make sure you're talking to someone who's going to treat it with the degree of seriousness it needs.
And is capable to do it.
Right, right. We'll take a quick break here. It's The Law Show with John Lakes and John White of Lakes White LLP in North Vancouver, and online, by the way, at LakesWhite.com. And I should let you know that Lakes White is LakesWhyte LakesWhyteLLP.com. Check it out while we take this quick break on The Law Show.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.